I am very excited to begin this project. I had a special request from a friend to make a couple of beer mugs for her daughter's wedding, and I've never done beer mugs before, so I found these on the Stainless Depot company, and I did mess up my first set of mugs. They are currently being stripped because this handle right here is pretty tricky. So the first time I attempted making these, I tried to get all fancy and I was glittering the handle and it just was very, very heavy. These mugs are heavy. And so this time around, I thought, you know what? I'm going to take the dang handle off of these mugs and I'll figure out what to do with those handles later. So instead of glittering, because the groom she didn't want glitter for the broom's mug, for the broom. She didn't want glitter for the groom's mug. And so what I wanted to do is glitter the mug for the bride. And then they didn't match and it didn't look right to me. So instead I figured I would use some really pretty spray paint that kind of looked glittery. So their colors are silver and burgundy. And so I wanted to do one tumbler white and silver with burgundy lettering, and then one tumbler black and silver with burgundy lettering. So that's what I went with. I was considering just leaving these handles silver as is, but they were scratching very easily, and I didn't want them over time to look very dull and dingy next to the really pretty epoxied tumblers that they were attached to. So what I decided to do is go ahead and sand them, and I'm glad I did, because underneath, that's just a layer, it's just a top layer of stainless. Underneath it's like bronzy looking. And so over time, those handles were just scratched, and then you would have seen the bronze peeking through around the edge. If you like that, then it would be a cool look for you, but that's not the look I was going for. So I went ahead and sanded them with a pretty heavy grit sandpaper, and then I spritzed them with rubbing alcohol. I took them outside and I spray painted the same metallic silver that I put on the tumblers. And then, because from the two tumblers that I messed up, I know that when you apply epoxy to these handles, because they have a pretty sharp edge on them, the epoxy wants to sort of slip off the edge. And so what you get is a handle that's epoxied on most of the areas. The faces of the handle have a nice coverage of epoxy, but the edges, you can still feel the handle through and it doesn't get a full coverage. So what I did is I went ahead and applied a layer of UV resin first before I attach these handles to the tumbler and then do an entire coat of epoxy. I could not figure out the best way to hold on to these as I was using my UV resin. So what I did is I took an old, this is a pen insert foam, a pen foam insert, and I've used it in my tumbler so much that the round holes that are used for the pens have squished down, and I thought that would be the perfect place to stick a skinny popsicle stick, and then I just popped my handle right over the top of those popsicle sticks, and it worked nicely. So I just made sure the underside was coated really well, and the top. I did the top and the sides first, cured it with a UV lamp, and then I did the underside. So this is handle number 2 that I'm working on, and when those are done, I'm just going to set those aside and wait to attach those to my tumblers. With a wedding gift, I wanted to throw in a little extra something for them. I don't know if they're big drinkers or if they, drink hard alcohol, or I really don't know, but it is a wedding. And so I thought it would be perfect to add a flask, a decorated flask. So I got this flask from the Stainless Depot company as well, just for fun to play with. And so I thought that was the perfect addition to this order. So the problem with this flask, there's no problem as is. If you have a stainless steel flask, it stands up nicely. But I knew that after I added layers of epoxy, the bottom flat portion of this flask would disappear. And I was trying to think of ways to keep that flat shape at the bottom with the epoxy applications. I mean, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 epoxy applications on here. And then I didn't know if I was going to put glitter on it. And so I was trying to find oval metal pieces of stainless steel, just separate, that I could apply to the bottom of the flask. And I found these on Amazon, and they are the perfect size. So I measured that little oval piece at the bottom of my flask first when I was searching, just to make sure I could find some that fit. And these ones that I ordered from Amazon are just slightly bigger than the one that was on the flask, and it makes the perfect little stand. And that little gap is going to disappear after you apply the layers of epoxy. So that worked out nicely. So I applied those little flat pieces with UV resin, and then I took it outside and I ombre'd. I didn't do white and silver or black and silver. I did it's like a wine color, which actually looks more red on camera, but it's still going to be really pretty with the letters. So I just spray painted that, and then I set it aside. So now it's time to apply my first layers of epoxy to all 3 of the items. So the white tumbler, the black tumbler, and the flask. So I'm just being really careful not to have a bunch of epoxy sitting on top of those metal pieces that are sticking out, because I'm going to have to apply the handles back onto these after that first layer of epoxy. So I was worried that I would accidentally get a bunch of epoxy stuck around those metal pieces and then my handles wouldn't go back on. And so I made sure I was really careful. I'm just going to apply a thin layer. This is not fast setting epoxy because I wanted it to level out very nicely. So I'm applying a thin layer of epoxy to all 3, the 2 tumblers and the flask, and I'm going to let them spin overnight. Before adding the last bit of epoxy to the flask, I sprinkled just a little bit of the Glitter Guys Twinkle to give that flask some extra sparkle. I also made sure to tape off both the top where the lid was going to go and that very bottom piece. I didn't really need to tape it off. I don't know why I taped it off. I guess I didn't trust myself to keep epoxy off the flat end of it. But after this first taping, it was more of a problem than it was worth. So my other layers of epoxy that I applied, I did not tape off that flat piece. So this is what I came up with to keep that flask level and inserted so it doesn't slip out. I used a pen holder. The foam insert is a pen holder, and then I just put my dowel inside the hole where your dowel would go if you were epoxying pens, and then I taped very, very tightly my flask onto that dowel, and it kept it nice and secure. Now that my tumblers have cured, I'm taking them off the tumbler turner and I'm ready to reattach both of the handles. So I did get epoxy stuck into the bottom screw hole of one of those handles slightly with my UV resin, so I have to take a craft knife and get that out. So if you're having issues attaching your handle, it might be because you have epoxy stuck in the hole. For the flask, I'm going to detach the dowel and take off the tape and then reapply it before the next layer of epoxy, and I'm also going to clean off the spray paint on the very bottom of the flask just to make sure that it has a nice clean bottom. Okay, so I am now ready to attach the words. So when I do custom orders, I use my Cricut machine to print, to do a different options for the print. So I had 4 different fonts and I had them written both horizontally and then stacked. And then I'll send a video or pictures to the person I'm making the tumblers for and have them choose which one they like best. So my friend chose the stacked number 4 font. So this was my option number 4. And so I stacked them on both the tumblers, and I made sure I measured and measured and measured so many times just to make sure that they were perfectly level and they matched exactly, because it really stinks when you have a pair of tumblers and one font sits higher on the tumbler than the other. So that would be a big mess. So I double checked, and then I turned them sideways and just made sure that they both looked even, and I was happy with the appearance. And for the flask, I put their name on there as well. And then on the back side, I put established 2022 because they are getting married this year. And look how nicely that stands up with those two little oval stainless steel pieces that I attached. And I am ready to reattach the dowels. This time I used electrical tape because that painter's tape, it like unraveled when I pulled it out of there. So this time I'm attaching with electrical tape, and I'm pulling really tightly to get that tape to secure that dowel as tight as it can get so it doesn't move as it's spinning. I'm going to seal it with a clear spray paint and give it one more coating of epoxy before I pull them off the turner one more time. Check for any rough edges, give it a good sanding, and then spin it one more time with its final coat of epoxy. And they are done. They've been cured. I cleaned off the edge with my craft knife and gave them a good wash with Dawn dish soap, and just made sure that all the debris was taken out from the inside if there was any. And I'm super happy with them. They turned out so delicate. For beer mugs, I was worried I couldn't get that wedding delicacy? That wedding delicate look, but I'm super happy with them, and I hope that my friend loves them too. So thank you so much for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments below, and I will list all the products I used. Bye.